Welcome back to a new episode of the Threshold Lab podcast. And for those that have been tuning in from the beginning, it's been such a blast for me to have these conversations with not only people that I think are high quality leaders and coaches, but they're also just cool people in multiple ways. And I think as you've maybe noticed too, there's been a couple that we've had throughout that I've had maybe closer personal ties with as well. And one of which is going to be the person that we have joining us today, which is Kibwé Johnson. I'm really excited to have Kibwé. He and I spent some time together at IMG Academy many moons ago, but I'm more than anything just excited to check in with him. As I'll get into, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, some of the things that in questions that I want to pose to Kibwé today are things that I saw and I observed from you and things I learned watching how you coached throwers during our time at IMG. So, and I know you've also had some pretty cool stops and experiences along the way. But first off, more than anything, I'm just thrilled to have you and appreciate you taking some time for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here and to kind of reconnect again.
Yeah, I think there's going to be as with other guests when you bring in cool people, there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of directions we could go. We'll kind of see where it does. Where I think could be an interesting place to start though is when you look at track and field athletes and particular throwers as well, there's such an emphasis on the technical piece of it and the physical aspects. I mean, there's all these different checkpoints that go into, what it might be a quote unquote perfect throw and whatnot. But something that you've shared that I think really resonated was there's an artistry behind being a thrower. And so I'd be interested to kind of start with where that kind of comes from, that belief or that ideology for you, and how you see it now show up in those that you coach.
Um, so I think the artistry component is is more or less a fancy way to talk about like an individual's ness, like the thing that they bring to the table that they can add to their throw. Um, and so for me, I ultimately landed on like anyone can learn the X's and O's of how to throw, right? Like the technical piece. Um, that part's not particularly difficult. Um, the difficult part is once you have learned the technical piece, how do you put yourself into it? And all of the best throwers, the ones that are winning, championships and medals and setting records, they are able to throw like themselves. They don't throw like anybody else. And so I think that's something that I think that's something that in an effort to be perfect, whatever that means to people, it gets lost. So there's a bridge that I personally identified that needed to happen from, hey, okay, now I know how to throw. Like it doesn't take long to know how to throw. You know what I mean? Um, and once you have that, okay, now what do we do? Where do we go from here? What does the throw look like in my head? That sort of thing.
How do you approach maybe communicating that individuality to throwers and maybe kind of what does that sound like when you're describing that and helping them understand the importance of the individuality component?
Um, it's still in process. I'm still learning how to best do that. Um, I'll share where I'm at with it now. Now I call it creating the conditions for whatever to happen, right? So I have a goal in mind. We'll take camera throw for instance. Honestly, all of the events, but like basically there's an orbit to the implement that I want to see, and then there's an efficient orbit, and then there's not an efficient orbit. And so I'm taking it upon myself to, as I say, create the conditions, right? Help the athlete get into positions where I can see that orbit. And then if I'm seeing it, then they're feeling it. If they're feeling it, they're like, whoa, that felt so good. I'm like, yeah. You know what I mean? And it's when that's the approach, it's much less about your foot needs to be here and your elbow needs to be here, right? These are the prescriptive um ways that that I how I learned. Um which again, there's nothing wrong with that per se. It's just it's going from that to this other place where I think athletes are better able to reach their better able to reach whatever their potential is.
I think we could, there's a moment where I think we can come back and I think we can zoom in a little bit more on how you now coach that in the moment and you create those conditions and how you create space and for self-discovery for those. Because I think that was very much something that I observed in watching the manner in which you coach during our time together. But you mentioned there briefly some of your experience as a competitor and as a world-class thrower. So I actually kind of want to maybe go to that for just a moment. For you, when it comes to the artistry, the psyche of becoming a world-class thrower, um, what did that, what went into that? What were the conditions for you to create that?
The conditions for me to create.
That's probably not the right way to say this. So let me back up. So when it
Yeah.
came to you becoming a world-class thrower, for you, how did you see the artistry, the individuality kind of component align or misalign with your experiences?
Ooh, so misalignments. I resonate with that a lot. And so the misalignment kind of came in again from personal experiences, and because of the kind of athlete that I was and am, I struggled with a lot of the kind of cookie cutter um, ways of throwing, ways that were being taught. And again, it's this. Nothing I say on this podcast is going to be a negative to any one person or any coach. I love them all, and they've all participated in my education. Um, but it does kind of come down to like knowledge is power kind of thing. And then everyone at any point in their journey, they are doing the best that they can with the information that they have. So with all of that kind of being out there, I think how people can tend to coach because of the athlete that I am, and there are others like I'm not special, and then there's I think tons of people that are kind of similar to how I used to be, particularly in those like formative years, like coming up. It was difficult, and so I more or less had to kind of figure it out for myself, and then also once I got to Bondarchuk, my time there really helped too. Um, but I ended up learning, and I also, and here's the other part too. And so prior to being with them, I kind of had an internal struggle with basically thinking I was like wrong or bad or whatever else because I did throw how I did. People like to say it's unorthodox and like it doesn't look like what someone else would do, and so um, the way that I would kind of get over things like that is no one else is ever going to say something that I haven't already said 10 times worse to myself. And so um, I had all those internal dialogues with myself, and I had believed them, and sometimes it would be effective in how I trained and competed, and sometimes it wasn't. Fast forwarding, and now um, we're with Bondarchuk, and then I start learning more about the individuality component to it, and it wasn't because he was slapping me over the head with the fact that everyone's an individual. These are more just kind of like realizations that I was having, and then I would have kind of separate conversations to either confirm or just ask his opinion, kind of thing. And so again, using hammer as an example, it went from the observation that people would be very, very specific about this one way to throw a hammer, to throw it far, in terms of like what the body looked like. You had to look like this to throw it far. Okay, well, it makes sense that that would be true. Um, but then given the experiences and then moving to Bonnerchuck, and he's credited with, I don't know, 18 or something like that, 80-meter throwers. But of that number, I think I was either the eighth or the ninth where the athlete reached 80 from, I don't want to say zero, but like from nowhere near 80 to reaching 80, as opposed to someone that, you know what I mean, he was just kind of credited with coaching at some point in their career. Anyway, and so I bring that up to say, once that was kind of like in my awareness and talking about it, of that number eight, not a single one of us looked the same. Not a single one of us were the same kind of athlete. Um, None of us had the same strength numbers. Like all of these things were kind of made blatantly clear to me. Um, and then we all threw the hammer 80 plus meters. But the thing that was kind of the same that I took to heart was how the hammer moves. So the orbit, as I previously mentioned, the orbit, for the most part, you can see it and you can feel it, but our bodies might look different. And so from that point on, I was just like, yeah, I mean, I don't know what I was, you know, getting hard on myself on for the previous 10 years or whatever it was before I got to him. Because it was just knowledge is power. So I was like, oh man, that was dumb. I can't believe I did that, but it's a learning lesson. And now, and from that point on, things started kind of changing in how I viewed my own throw in general. And then once I got to the coaching part, I was really long-winded, my bad.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I think the thread through it that I think is helpful to understand is hearing how your personal experiences, and particularly the misalignment and feeling like certain things maybe just didn't quite click or resonate for you as you're going through it, like how that now has shaped your approach to coaching those that you coach today. Like that's actually, I think, really helpful to kind of hear. I think when somebody makes the transition from being an elite performer to coaching, it's not like you go to school for that. It's not like there's not always a formal pathway to do that. You kind of just start and you start coaching and you take things that you've seen from mentors and guides you've had along the way. And also, what I hear you kind of describing is not only is it important to identify what you want to take and make your own, but also what do you want to leave behind as well? How do you not want to coach? And so here's maybe a way where we could explore what that would look like and how that maybe now shapes your current coaching is like, let's say for a quick moment, you today were coaching you as a competitor, as an athlete. What would you change or how would you do things differently for you?
That's a good question. I try to identify what the athlete does really, really well, and then I try to not poo-poo on it. so, thinking about myself, right? If I'm coaching myself, I got this little skinny dude in the ring, and he's really fast, and he just turns around, turns in circles. So, like, the speed is good. That right? Now we're talking about things that can't be coached and just can't be. You could train it to a certain degree, I guess. But what I'm getting at is like genetics, right? Um, how do I help my younger self and athletes in the real world how do I help them use those gifts and put it in a throw? And like the first step to using those gifts is not making them feel bad for having them. Those gifts are beautiful. They are yours. No one else has them, right? And from that point on, I use that to cultivate what their throw is. Because like I said, part of that was part of my journey prior to going to Dr. B was having these internal struggles with listening or allowing other people to tell me the kind of thrower or person or whatever that I was. Um, there's a lot of battles there, I think. Um, and I think knowing that helps me kind of identify that in the athletes that I coach, and then it allows me to actually get into the throw itself and allow their thing to come out. So, um, more practically speaking, I suppose I kind of came. This is while I was still in Florida, actually, at IMG, and I started following, yeah, Ito Portal, the movement guy. He's all over social media, and throwing is movement, period. And so, I was really into it, and he had a term called a movement riddle, and it was riddle, and I was like, oh my god, that's exactly what it is that I'm trying to do when I'm coaching throwers. I'm solving the riddle of how they move. And so doing that means I don't come to the throw with any preconceived notions or assumptions about how they move or how they should move. I watch the move and then I help them. I kind of nudge the implement to move how it needs to move efficiently. Um, it is, in my opinion, more challenging to do it that way, right? Because like my brain has always got to be on. I can't just blurt out the same thing all the time. Um, but it's a lot of fun, and it also kind of relies on, not relies, but there's a big aspect of collaboration, and so I talk to them a lot about what it is they're feeling, what it is that they're thinking, um, and then we just try to figure out the riddle, like on a throw by throw basis.
There's so one of the things that really I love in this, one of our previous guests that we had on the show, he's a high performance kind of consultant and coach with a lot of NBA players. And one of his signature lines within his philosophy is like he wants players to become great at what they're good at. In essence, he's like, I want to make sure that those strengths, those gifts that you describe, let's accentuate those things and make those elite first. And then obviously we can kind of fill in gaps and inefficiencies and things like that from there. Um,
Mhm.
but I think the other piece of it is hearing you, and I think this is very much something I observed during my time there watching you coach, there was such a deliberateness to when you spoke. And like, yes, you talked to athletes a lot, but it was always through the form of questions, more often than
Mhm.
not. And I think that's what a great way to create that self-discovery too for players. And so, kind of taking some of those threads, and if there's, I'm curious now if there's maybe any others, but if you were to think more broadly now and somebody asks you, hey, Kibwé, please describe for me kind of your philosophy, your approach to coaching, which I know is an extremely loaded question, but what would you say now are kind of the fundamental components of how you teach and coach?
And it's probably what we just talked about, the movement riddle part. And so kind of blowing that up, the idea is um, that one's throw, someone's throw cannot be told or given to them, which is more or less adapted from, the Tao anyway. But it's like, it's true. And so everything that we've talked about so far, um, again, with that personal experience and people telling me what something was going to be, and it just wasn't for whatever reason. And so, um, if I'm solving for the person's throw, A, they're going to feel good, both physically and mentally. They will most likely throw their farthest. And they will also, which is more relevant to what it is that we do in track and field, they'll be more consistent. Um, and it's really simple, like what I'm trying to do. Um, I don't know, maybe it's challenging, but like that's it. It's like it's solving for how they move.
You touched on the Tao, right? And I know that's something that's be kind of come the signature thread through how you coach, how you teach, and everything that goes into the hammer. And you talk about the Tao of the hammer. Um, and so for those that might be less familiar with that or the underlying meaning and everything behind it, like how would you kind of break that down, and why that's also become so integral to your framework?
Yeah, so it came from a desire to more clearly communicate what was happening, um, what was happening during a throw, as opposed to the more prescriptive way of saying do this. I think secondly, it's about the individual who's in the circle, in the ring, right? The man in the ring, um, bringing their awareness to the throw and less reliance on the how and what's happening on the coach, the one not in the ring. Um, I find that doing that cuts off the athlete from their own truth, right? Like their own wisdom. Um, for example, athlete takes throw, immediately looks at coach. Like the brain's off. They're just waiting to receive something from the coach, and then they try it again, right? And um, I don't want it to be confused though, because obviously like that's part of the process, even in how I do it. But what I'm getting at is when it's done specifically that way, if the athlete's brain is off, like there's no kind of give and take there, and it's just done. They're not thinking about it, they're not feeling it, they're just tell me what to do next. And so there is a specifically kinesthetic disconnect there when that's how it is, where um when it's more open and we're solving for it, and I'm trying to emphasize specifically the awareness of what's happening, um it tends to work a little better. Now obviously I don't do this or have the expectation for this to happen for beginners or anyone or even people who aren't that experienced yet. um and so there's kind of like step processes to how I do this, like in real time. um Sometimes that gets lost too, because I like to play with it on social media, and I do talk about Dow Hammer, and I my thing is like saying like do nothing, and I play it up on the internet. Is it as simple as saying do nothing? Like I don't just stand around and say do nothing at practice every day, um, or at all, really. But it does come out occasionally because it is right. That is what happens. I just know 'cause I'm an idiot. I just know that like you can't coach someone that way, like not really. Um, but the ones that get to a level where they have enough hammer experience, right? Because that's relative. It doesn't You might have someone get to that in a year, or it might take 7 years. Doesn't matter. Um, if I'm doing the job that I want to do effectively, they will get to a point in how it is that they feel because I'm helping them get into those positions that they're just like, okay, I got to the third or fourth turn or the release of the throw, and then I just don't know what to do. Like, how do I control it? Well, first of all, you don't. Right. And so it if this is why I think it's powerful. You get to that point and in that conversation, light bulbs and flashes start going off. That's the opportunity for discovery, I guess. I don't know, right? But you know, if I just went to them and was like, just do this. If you do this, this will happen. Well, okay, well, what happens if the athlete does that and it doesn't happen? So if we keep it collaborative, yeah, those are the things that happen with Tao of Hammer as a philosophy, and also I think it's kind of like a technical thing, and then also as a, I don't know, framework kind of guidepost for how I coach as well. Um, yeah.
Towards the beginning of that response, I had this image briefly pop up, which I know you're probably very familiar with from the movie Forgetting Sarah Marshall, where it's the surf scene, right? Where he's
Yes.
trying to learn how to surf and he's getting coached and he's like, say, hey, do less, like, and
Do
he's like, no,
this.
and he just keeps putting it. So that was where my mind initially went
Yeah.
there.
I've
However,
definitely posted that before in my, because I like to post memes too, because life's not that serious. Like let's enjoy a laugh. And I did that one of my times, and it was this is Tao of Hammer right here. This is it.
it is. I love that. I love that. It's a perfect illustration for it. And I think like what was cool to hear you describe in that maybe full response is, you kind of mentioned earlier in it this give and take, and then also like I think something that you've shared in previous conversations with the Tao of the Hammer is this notion there's like this yin and yang that can come with it. And so let's give an example because you brought this one up. You talked about like control, like when an athlete tries to, control their way through a movement versus just like flow, or whatever the yang is to the yin. So here's where I think I'd be interested in that is like, could you talk a little bit more about what you see as some of those primary like yin and yang, whether that's in the form of you as a coach or for actual throwers?
If I'm understanding, so I would the thrower and the implement. Well, yeah, thrower and implement, or thrower and ego.
Yeah,
um
sure.
so there's kind of multiple planes at play there, I think. And a lot of us, particularly in North America, we come from a different sports world, right? I came from football, and um though that was a lot of fun, for some reason I chose track and field. Probably for this, you know what I mean? um and um yeah, I don't know, I lost my train of thought there, but
That's okay. That's okay. Here's
yeah, like,
go ahead.
yeah, well, just the interplay between the two, right? So coming from that area, it's a lot of working really hard, particularly in the weight room, trying really hard, and if you try really hard, you'll get it. Well, um it can work. I think some people are fortunate enough slash lucky enough that it can work, but for the vast majority, it doesn't work that simply. Um, you can do everything perfectly, everything according to plan, and then it just doesn't work. So what happens then? And so I think there's more freedom. Freedom is kind of a thread through all of this as well for me. Anyway, and so freedom and letting go, blah blah blah. And so going back to like thrower and implement, or thrower and ego, it's kind of interchangeable there, where um the athlete needs to learn to kind of stay centered regardless of what's happening on the outside. Like the noise, the energy, the implement starts screaming and going really fast. Okay, what do I do? And then I think it's a natural human reaction, not even talking about athletes, natural human reaction that when things start going like that, we want to go like this. We want to contract. Um, and the sooner that we can learn to not contract when those things are happening, the farther we throw. But that's more of an advanced thing because again, you can't with someone who's thrown hammer or discus for 2 years. Um, it's less likely that they would be able to a understand and let alone like do it. You know.
You mentioned kind of with the background also initially with also football, right? And in one of the things that you described is like there's definitely a difference in terms of just like the sheer output through the work ethic and like the word force was kind of like coming up for me, like forcing your way through something. And I think like a default in a lot of, especially from an athlete's perspective, is, like I'll take like a hitter, for example, in baseball. I mean, a lot of with what you've been describing, I'm also picturing pitchers in baseball, but let's say a hitter like struggling, there can be this default to try to like force and fix your way out of it versus just allowing your body to do what it does and trust what you've trained and trust your body and everything. And there's a lot more freedom in the latter. And so that being, I think, one of the things that you're in essence describing is less this yin of forcing and fixing and more of this yang of allowing and trusting, which again is probably a better recipe or a condition for
Mhm,
freedom,
mhm.
which I appreciate. I
Yeah,
think
definitely. Yeah, I like that a condition for freedom. The other thing that I, eh, in this context, have talked about too, though less lately, is like just the dynamic of energies, masculine and feminine, which is you know yin and yang anyway. But it's like there are different, um, maybe different observations or kind of ways of thought to kind of describe that. Even though, in my opinion, on its surface, it's more or less the same. It's just basically different cultures talking about something similar. Um, which in my growth I've really enjoyed. Like, I dive into a lot of that stuff because I'm just intellectually fascinated by all of it.
let's let's kind of we're talking a lot about kind of where you're at currently in terms of your approach, your philosophy around coaching and kind of how it shows up, what it sounds like, and so on. And where I also think would be interesting is to hear, kind of also the evolution, like you mentioned it a little bit earlier, where you're not coming from a space of, hey, I have all the answers, I'm still learning, I'm still figuring a lot of this out as well. But I think when you kind of go back to the roots of your coaching experience, maybe like early on, were there things that you felt like in hindsight that you overvalued or things that you've now like let go of or changed your mind about that now are different in your coaching approach?
uh, um, I think early on in my coaching experience, which was probably my last few years of competing professionally, and the first little while at IMG Academy, which was my first like um, coaching job as a profession. Although I had coached for I don't know, probably at least 10 years prior to that, but I was competing that entire time, so it wasn't a job. Um, I came to realize it was a bit of ego on my side. Um, more so because I think I expected, not I think I did. I expected more people to essentially have the same kind of wonder and curiosity and engagement that I did that led me to Bondarchuk. Um, because there was very little information about him or his training prior to a few of us North American athletes moving to go train with him in Canada. Um, and so, yeah, at that time, we're talking 20, when did I leave there? 15. We're talking 2015, 16, probably those 2 years. And I expected more people to ask me questions and what did you guys do? And, can I be a part of it somehow? Or like, can you coach me kind of thing? Um, and then absolutely when I came down to IMG in 15, I straight up had that expectation. And when it 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 didn't happen, and I was like, what's going on here? Like, what's wrong with everyone? um, and so eventually I got over that, but like that was kind of my expectation and more or less like the very beginning of me developing my coaching style slash philosophy, if you will. Um, and so that lesson was important. That lesson was like, I mean, if people are only gonna do or what I mean, want to be involved in something that they want to be involved in, and it's not personal, that's just what they're doing. And a lot of times it's like it's also fear and fear of the unknown, right? And so I totally get that because the vast majority of people don't understand the type of programming that we did there. Still to this day, which is fine. It's not an issue, but I understand that that's a pretty decent barrier to entry. And I get that. I'm totally like that too in most things, but for some reason with that I was like, no, I'm doing this. And then the second part of like my early times was at IMG and and you're familiar, doing the wild 50 weeks a year of camp. Um, it allowed me to iterate, like quickly from seeing different kids on a weekly basis and working through the things that how I would teach. Um, and I still do it now. It just happened a lot faster then, right? Like I think about, I don't know, I like comic books and the Marvel movies, right? And so like Doctor Strange, and the one scene at the end of his first movie and he's going against Dormammu, that's his name. And because he was in that infinite loop, like that's why he came out of that scene like he's so great because he practiced against this thing for countless times. That's kind of how I view my first couple years, especially at IMG and my coaching style and really being able to find ways to better communicate the things that I wanted to say and do and see out of throwers. I was just talking about this the other day with an athlete, and some of my personally most fun times coaching there was when we had athletes that spoke little to no English. And so it just became an opportunity to try to verbalize the things that I wanted with either very few words or no words. Um, and then coming to understand that like words get in the way. Words mean different things to different people. And if I'm saying I can say how to do something this way with two different athletes and they'll each take it differently. And so kind of understanding that that's just a funny slash weird slash, whatever kind of thing that humans do. Okay, so how do I get around that? So like there's lots of things in how I have come to where I am now where I've tried to circumnavigate around the human condition. I never said it that way. That's so funny.
Uh, uh, you it's another flashback that you've given me. I can very much go back now and think about those sessions, those times at IMG and camps and things where, yes, you had kids from all over the world and kids where you're like, I mean, I would not by any means say I'm even fluent in English, let alone multiple languages like
Yeah.
many of these kids were. I mean, some of them spoke multiple, and then on top of that, to then try to interpret someone like myself, who at the time, like, I mean, that was pretty early on in my uh, journey in doing kind of being a performance coach and things. And like in hindsight, I'm sure I'm gonna make an assumption here that it's maybe not too off for you, where you go back and you think about things you used to do, and you're like, why was I doing that? Or why did I like say these things so much, or whatever it might be. So anyway, it was such a great. I love the word like iterating too, like what you described, where it's a space. It was a space to experiment. It was a space to iterate. It was a space to like not just theorize how to coach and how to train somebody, but to be in the quote unquote ring with them and to guide them and to do so potentially with silence or modeling or whatever the case might be. It was a really rich space for that.
Yeah, yeah, it really was. I'm enjoying some of the things that you're remembering. 'Cause and that was one of the things I really liked about, this is kind of off topic. I really liked about IMG was the collection of all of these I don't know, all the facets that are necessary for an athlete to succeed. And so um in my experience that had never happened before, and so right, and so like to their credit, to be able to have your technical coach and your mental conditioning coach, and maybe your, I don't know, nutritionist might come over there, but whatever, but specifically like the technical coach and the mental conditioning coach, to just kind of be out there, and whether or not you actually said anything or not, you got to observe the athlete, and maybe the coach too, but like the athlete, and how they were kind of intaking things, and how they were managing, the ebbs and flows of like a practice or a competition. um I think that was really powerful. I imagine they're still doing it. I have no idea, but
Out of curiosity, with some of these other places that you've had stops around, like maybe not obviously quite to the extensiveness that it had at IMG. I mean, obviously it was a really unique place, but um, in terms of, are there other spaces that you've seen that have done a good job of having that presence of, again, a mental conditioning coach, a performance coach, as almost like kind of use the phrase like a second set of eyes for coaches? And if you haven't, also too, like how have you approached that as well? Because I know you mentioned earlier being very intellectually curious. You would always ask these great questions, and you were always this student of across different disciplines. So I'm just kind of curious also now on a personal lens, how you kind of continue to grow and who helps you.
Mm. Who, I'll answer that part first. Who helps me? I I'm using that curiosity. I try to read and kind of absorb things. I go in and out of phases of podcasts. I'm currently out of phase with listening to podcasts, but I do really enjoy them. Um, and also for years and years now, I am influenced, again, because of that curiosity, by all kinds of disciplines and academic areas, and also sports. And so, there's tons of carryover, both mentally and technically, physically, in things like baseball and golf. um any of the martial arts, like all of those things, there's like the similarities are just nuts. And so like the more I read about all of these things, the more I'm like, oh duh. And so a lot of the things that I've talked about have been informed by those, either realizations or maybe something in a different sport or different philosophy says something that perfectly encapsulates like what it is that I want to say. Because most of these things aren't my own words. Some of them are, but um, but I think that they do the job better than I can. And so bringing that into the throwing or track and field space, it opens up a door. You know what I mean? Where if you've been in the throwing space all your life, like now we're starting to experience things that we've never come across before. And that's great. And it opens up a new section of the brain, and then things start tingling, and then once that happens, it kind of becomes a cascade, and then you start realizing, holy cow, I can feel my throw. I can feel my throw when I'm sitting here in my seat, right? Like that to me, that style of hammer. I can sit here, I got goosebumps right now. I'm feeling my throw. You know what I mean? And it's just an energy. And so I I want to help everyone feel that. Firstly, in the ring with their implement, but like be to such a degree that like they can be anywhere and then just kind of have just settle into the feeling wherever they are. I think that's amazing. I forgot the other half of this answer.
That's okay. That's okay. I love that sentiment that it's with you always. And when you're so ingrained in it and you come from this space of being curious and a student and just kind of learning to grow and everything, like I think it's we use the go back to using your term of conditions. It just creates these really wonderful conditions too for somebody to flow.
Yeah. Yeah, and flow is one of those things too. Um Something that I talk about a lot, either to the ones that completely understand it or as a kind of North Star, is we need to get to a point where we are throwing as a reaction. Throwing as a reaction. Um, if it's an action, that means we're thinking about it. And if we're thinking about it, we're not throwing. Um, Basically what I'm getting at there is it's like we by intentionally thinking about doing something will never be as strong or as fast as not thinking about it if the body just does it. And so kind of continuing on that thread of like creating the conditions for things to happen, I'm aimed to create conditions that the athlete simply reacts and then the ball is gone. And then, the few times that I hear that from athletes, they're just like, I don't know what happened. Good. Now we need to do it consistently to a point where like you can feel it the whole time, but it's not you thinking, okay, I'm in turn two. I need to turn my knee and I put my foot down, and then I'm going to rise up and release it as hard as possible. If you're doing any of that, you're not throwing far,
Mm.
or at least not as far as you can. Um, and that's kind of a thing too, that you start to discover more and more. Like that's literally in every sport that involves something technical. The goal is to learn the thing and then unlearn it in a way that you can do it not thinking about it. Um, yeah, so flow. I talk about that too. Maybe not by name very much, but like that's
Sure.
exactly what's happening. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep. No, that's good. And I think that would be a nice um segue to I want to get down to like kind of our final few questions here in the conversation. I'm keeping you from your kids, so I don't want to take up too much more time, but I
Right.
think I would be remiss if I didn't take this time to ask you a few more questions when it comes to, I think, the mentality and the mindset and the mental skills behind being a world-class thrower, because we've had some amazing guests so far on the show who have a wealth of experience, especially from a leadership and a coaching background. Some of them certainly have had very successful playing careers as well. Um, and I don't know that there's been too many that have also brought in the world class competitive experience that you've had as an elite athlete too. So I would be remiss if I didn't, I think, touch on that a little bit. So, with these last few kind of questions here, let's talk about mental skills just for a moment. If you could kind of install maybe one mental skill that you think would be really valuable for any thrower or performer to hone, what would it be and why? And this could come from either your coaching and or your personal competitive background.
Uh, the answer at this moment in time, as a coach, is open collaborative mind. And as an athlete, or thinking what perhaps I could have done better earlier in my career that would have bled in and only continued to thrive later in my career, is adaptability, basically. Both, well, just period adaptability, grit. You know what I mean? A lot of athletes, um, life happens, and you got to make decisions, and so we lose, particularly in, I would say, in North America, we lose a lot of athletes because they just don't have the option to continue. Um, and that's unfortunate. I would, I would like to kind of solve that issue. I don't really know how yet. If anyone else has some ideas, unfortunately, it's gonna take some resources, which is why we lose a lot of athletes. Although the resources now available to athletes is, frick, it's so much more than when I was an athlete. Um, but I had a really good situation. I was sponsored by Nike, I had New York Athletic Club, and so that allowed me, and my family was pretty supportive at a lot of times too. That allowed me to do the things that I needed to do. But that's not everyone's situation, and so being able to help where they can. Um, yeah, as a coach, the open and collaborative thing, because I think it's about the spark. And it's about, again, the freedom component. It's going to be more powerful and more lasting if athlete arrives at it themselves. Um, and as a coach, coaching that kind of athlete, and I think this is something that I try to bring, is going to be the patience, because I think we touched on it earlier. Not every athlete's going to move at the same pace. Like, they just won't. It's impossible, right? And so sometimes they'll get someone who figures it out again the first month. It might take 3 years. So in that 3 years, am I going to be frustrated? And if I'm frustrated, am I going to show it? Um, these are all things that well, I think, at least, I think I recognize and try not to do, both because of personal experience and also just, again, the things that I've read and consumed over the years, about how to communicate. And we've talked about my kids. I was a dad, like, because the other part too that we actually haven't touched on yet, and it could probably be an entirely other podcast episode, is the cliche of, like, once I became a dad, it did change everything. um and it changed everything, well, everything. So now we're talking, like, because I was still a professional athlete then, changed my athlete life. It changed, um, my partnership life. It changed, well, it started and continued to change how I was as a father, as a coach, like the whole thing. Um, and so those are all parts to how and why I coach the way I do. Um, and I'm enjoying that journey because it's ongoing. My kids are now 13 and 10, and so it's a whole different phase of doing all of those things. Whole different phase. I got a teenager and one that's pre-teening hard. So so it's great. It's lovely. And just, like, again, I'll accentuate the patience part. And in that patience, what am I doing with it? Am I just continually working on the object, like the thing that it is that I want to see? Or are they seeing something in my body language that's just like, ugh, and like those micro kind of microaggressions maybe, but like those kind of micro emotions, whether or not I think my athletes or my children see it, they do. Um, and so just kind of trying to be positive all the time. At IMG, I had a girl, this is during one of those camp weeks, and she was like, "Why don't you ever yell? Why don't no, 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 sorry. It was more specific. She was like, "Why don't you ever yell at me?" And I was like, "Why would I yell at you? Like you're throwing. Throwing's the greatest thing in the world." Like and it's like it's that realization the more that I'm coaching, and then now I'm in the NCAA, and you get athletes sharing experiences about their previous this is a new athlete that just transferred in. um I shouldn't have said that, but anyway. um Athletes that share experience about previous coaches or like parents even, and I don't want to say it's a problem, but like it is out there where it can be, I don't know, various levels of harming or toxic, right? And I don't want to coach that way.
I think it's that word patience really kind of sticks out. And again, I
Yeah.
think what's awesome is throughout, both in the beginning of this conversation and now throughout, like you touching on some of those different influences, not just those directly as an athlete, those through coaches that you've had, but also some of the life experiences, the coaching iterations that you've gone through at different stops. Like it all shapes the individuality of how Kibwé coaches. And now that now shapes how you approach the individuality of those that you get to lead, which I think is
Right.
is kind of cool to see. It's almost like a full circle here. I have two last quick questions here, hopefully quicker, but for your sake. But you when you mentioned the word patience, what stood out for me too is there's moments as an athlete where you're in a plateau, where you're putting in results. I mean, you're putting in work, but you're not reaping any results, and you just haven't quite had that breakthrough. So for you, whether it was through a your competitive career or now as a coach, like can you think of a moment that really is stands out where somebody broke out of a plateau and what maybe needed to change, um, and kind of how it unfolded for that person to kind of get to that breakthrough?
I think this one is, honestly can't find a specific example, particularly in the last 10 years or so. But um, plateaus can be, and actually, I'm thinking of this is because particularly with how we trained with Bondarchuk, it more or less invited plateaus. And so the answer to that was like change the stimulus. And so, like the physical stimulus. So on one hand, like that's a pretty easy, fix, if you will. Um, from a mental standpoint, I would say it's reframing it a little in a more positive light and basically just kind of staying the course. Um, I think like how I was talking about myself earlier, like with all of these things, and like, you have conversations and everything's happening on the outside, and then, athlete starts to kind of personally judge themselves for, I don't know, any number of things that they may or may not have control over. And so if it's framed as this is just No, it's not even a chess. This is the reality. The reality is you know, there's training happening, and it's kind of just been the same lately. Okay. Well, I keep training mentally, and then maybe I experiment and try to do some other things. You know, if it's athlete training themselves, or if they have a coach, and if they have a coach, you know, maybe they, like I said, change stimulus up a little bit. You try to do these things, and I would I would venture to say most of the time, like that would solve that. I think the biggest issue there is the mental component of plateaus and 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 thoroughly embodying the fact that life isn't over in the middle of those plateaus. And again, I that's easier said than done. I lived that thousands of times. I get it. But that's why it's important to have, you know, your coach or your closest kind of confidant like be that container for you to be safe and being a little bit uncomfortable. I think the uncomfortable part is natural, because I don't think it's as simple as saying, "Hey, don't think that. It's not true." You know what I mean? Um, what needs to happen is for athlete to be safe to think that, and know that like this is completely normal, and I'll be fine. A little bit of patience. Tomorrow we're going to show up and we're going to do the same thing, or you know, we're going to do the thing, and then keep going.
Awesome. That brings me, okay, last question here, and then I'll take you off the hot seat. So, um, you can take this in whatever direction you would like, but Kibwe, I'd love to know, this is a question I ask all the guests at the end. What's something that you're proud of that maybe you don't always get an excuse to talk about?
This might be a stumper. Um, well, we're talking about, you know, my coaching philosophy and stuff, and I've never been asked this, and it might be a product of just being fresh in mind because we've been talking about it, but I think like my how I approach my coaching, um, it's been some years kind of developing again both the technical side and then also like the actual practical coaching side. Um, I've come to realize that it's not necessarily like its own thing or a style or anything like that. It's actually a framework to kind of apply to any particular way you think or coach. Um, so for example, you know, coach coach A thinks that there's only one way to throw a discus. Okay, you know, that's fine, and that's how coach A chooses to share the knowledge that they have. I think how I present and think about the throw is applicable to that as well, because again, at the end of the day, like it's like it's like we talked about, it's the solving for the movement, and then like the observation and the awareness of it, and all of those things can be applied to that. And so I don't know, I guess I'm proud of something that feels different and something that didn't exist when I was throwing. That's my answer. It didn't exist. Um, and I'm glad that it does now in my tiny little part of the world.
I appreciate you sharing that, and I think what's been really cool for me in this conversation is hearing you maybe more explicitly describe some of these things, like what's under the hood for Kibwe and what's going through that mind, because I know there's a lot of different things and a lot of different things that you're just so intellectually curious. So it's been cool to hear where it comes from, what
Yeah,
shaped it, and also now how it's showing up for you as a coach, as a parent, and so on. But I think the other thing, and I don't want to I don't want to speak for you here if this is a misinterpretation, but I think it wasn't until you started with your answer of like, oh, like nobody's really asked me about some of these things before. So it's been kind of cool to maybe think about how I conceptualize my approach, my philosophy, and so on. But I say that from the standpoint of we spent a lot of time in this conversation discussing creating space for athletes for self-exploration. And as a coach, you're that guide on the side who asks questions and models for them and helps them find it. I think what I'm also, I guess, in essence getting at is like one thing that's been a cool thread with some of these coaches that I've had conversations with is I think that future in coaching is also like who helps be that thinking partner for other coaches. Like who's the person now asking coaches questions to reflect on their approach to coaching to help them get clear on it, to help them be more consistent, to show up authentically and so on. And again, that might be a slight um, misinterpretation of what you share, but I think it's like it's been cool to kind of hear you walk us through that, and now it makes me wonder what it could look like for more coaches to like reflect on some of these questions that maybe you otherwise don't always get asked. Everybody loves to probably ask like technical and physical and all that, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I love um, I think it's spot on to say showing up authentically. That's where it happens. Excuse me. And it takes a lot. People have to kind of go through some stuff before, they have to go through a bit of a descent and reemerge out of that before they're free and confident and okay enough to be more authentic. And I think in that authenticity is where you're probably getting many of the guests that you have. Um, yeah, I don't know. It took me almost 2 years, particularly with my technical ideas and how to throw. It took me almost 2 years to like say it to anyone else. Like it was all up here and then like on notes on my phone and then journals, um, for a variety of reasons again. And part of my, you know, descent and reemergence was being more confident to kind of say anything because they are different, right? and and then there was also the part like we talked about earlier, like and then I just kind of like leaned into it and had fun, do nothing. Right, and like some people think it's really great and it definitely resonates with a decent amount of people, but then yeah, then there's the other athlete that's like, what the hell are you talking about? Like that makes no sense. Well, not right now, doesn't, you know what I mean?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
just like, okay. And 20 years ago I would have said the exact same thing. um if there is an origin, 'cause I actually didn't get into this because there is a bit of an origin to what kind of sparked all of this. Was I was a freshman at University of Georgia, go Dogs, and and we went to UTEP Invitational, and um, Lance Steele, the former American record holder in the hammer throw, competed there, and we had a really good Croatian hammer thrower on the team at the time, and I didn't throw really hammer then. I was recruited and I went there as a discus thrower, but I kind of played with it anyway. And so Coach Babbitt, one of my great mentors, he knew him well enough that he asked Lance to come out to dinner with like the throws team, and so we all go out to dinner, and I sat way too far away from him. So this is the first time I met Lance. I'll have to share this podcast with him so he gets this shout out. And but he was just talking about hammer, and partly because I didn't have much experience with the event at the time. Um but also like he was talking about it in a way that I was like, I don't know what he's talking about, but like you can see him again, like going to places, and he was like so descriptive, and like the things that he was, you know, describing and feeling, and I knew that, like, yeah, I didn't really understand what he was saying, but like there's something there. And so, at some fast forwarding, realizing that like it ended up being me wanting to communicate those sorts of things to a broader audience, I suppose. And and then I started understanding, again later on through experience in the event, like kind of what he was talking about. And then I realized I basically talked about the hammer exactly how he did. Where it's like, so I don't know if I'm successful or not, but it did kind of inform like how I coach because of that experience. But I know for a fact, I'm sure that there's still people out there just like, what? And I'm like, well, if you just it is it's more challenging, through Instagram and Facebook and in podcast form. But like if it's real life, I've got you in front of me with a hammer, like it's really not that hard.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Uh,
that's kind of where all that started.
hmm. It's cool to hear you kind of come up with some of these insights or reminders for yourself, as you start to think about, again, all the different things, experiences, people that have shaped who Kibwé is today, and I'm sure we barely scratched the surface. There's probably a long list
Yeah,
of other people, right? And and
yeah.
and again, even going back to what we shared at the beginning, those that have maybe shaped it in a way that you found to be most helpful, and also those in a way that maybe again helped shape it in a way where it's like, ooh, this isn't maybe authentic to me, or this isn't the way that in which I want to lead or to coach and things like that. And so all this to say, I think it's been a cool full circle conversation, and I'm beyond honored again, Kibwé, that you took some time out of your morning, or after, I guess it's in the afternoon now for you, to just have the conversation and to reflect a little bit. And so, yeah, I'm just super appreciative of you.
Thank you, man. This was great. It's I haven't had a conversation like this in a while, like particularly in podcast form, and so it's clear to me that more of these things are cementing themselves, I think. And also partly because I'm preparing. I've got a presentation, a coaching clinic in Montreal in a couple of weeks, and so I think that might be part of it too. Just there's some
Cool.
stuff kind of front of mind. So it's fun to kind of dig into more of this stuff outside of my own brain.
Cool. Cool. Well, hopefully, at least hopefully some of my questions weren't too off the wall, that kind of helped maybe give you some things to reflect on and prep for that. And I'm looking forward to the next conversation. So thank you again.
Yeah, yeah, me too. This is great.